Jonesy and his wife had always lived a normal life in a quiet Nebraska town. They had no neighbors within miles, and they had been tinkering with scientific experiences their entire marriage. Now that they had been successful in creating a time machine in which they were able to see what happened and actually experience what happened to other people through their own results for up to a very short time. Anything over 20 minutes, it became very difficult to bring them back. So it was normal to only have about 18 minutes to safely go and observe what happened. Now, while they were in this state, they were unable to be seen by the people, and they could just walk through with very little difficulty. On the TV screen, Mrs. Jones would watch what was going on and be able to pull them back if something happened. So they had so many things that had happened that they wanted to find out the truth and help the family get a closure. Also, make sure that the correct person was in jail. So after going through thousands and thousands of different cases, they had made the decision that they would be going back to the state of Indiana in the year 1996. That was the year that a young girl named Lynn Dresser was working at a convenience store. Now, it was a warm summer evening. It was only 4:30 in the afternoon when she was last seen. But sometime between 4:30 and 4:45, when the next customer came in, she disappeared. Massive manhunt. They went everywhere looking for this girl. And unfortunately, her body was not found until 2 weeks later, laying by a creek. It had been too awful to her family, and her mother and two brothers are still alive, desperately looking for help to find out who had killed their wonderful sister and daughter. So it was going to be this night that they would go back for the 20 minutes and see if they could find out what had happened. So they set the clock for 4:32, just 2 minutes after the last customer had left, and began to track back into time. Jonesy had made the trip. Now this would be his third trip, and he was getting a little bit more attuned to what happened, because for a couple of minutes after you reach the time, there is some nervousness and a little bit of dizziness. So he goes into the machine and transports successfully to the convenience store. He looks around. He doesn't see anybody. And he goes into the store, startling the young girl who was still at the counter, because although he could not be seen, he still had to open and close the door. And the girl looked up, surprised to see the door open and close as if someone had come in, when there was actually nobody there. He had only been there a few moments when a young man came in, and the girl and him started having an earnest discussion. It was obvious that she knew him and that he knew her. It was in that time that he grabbed her and forced her into his car. As the Jonesy jumped into the back seat of the car, they were startled by the shutting of the door, but the man didn't care. He traveled right to the riverbank where they said the girl's body was going to be found. And just as the man raised the hammer to her head, Jonesy was sent back to his own time. Now, chapter 2. Jonesy now knew, and so did his wife and Adam Corrington, that this man had been the murderer. And it was time to look into who is who and suspects and see if they could find the answer. It was after going through hundreds and hundreds of photos, they still had not found the young man who had done the murder. They had no pictures. He wasn't on the police radar. So it was with great surprise that they had not had any luck. In a rare decision, Adam and Jonesy decided to make the trip to this small town in Indiana. It was there that they decided they would try to find the young man who they had known to be the murderer. As they pulled into the police station to get information from possibly the detective or whatever, to their shock, they were answered by the young man who had done the murder. He was the detective doing the investigation. There was no way to explain what was to happen in the proof that they had, but they went back to their office and started going over all the information they had. They now knew who the murderer was, but they knew that he was going to be free as long as they were unable to prove what had happened. Chapter 3. It was a long, thought-out process, but it was thought that Jonesy should go back to the car that he had originally been in and stay long enough to see what had actually happened, hoping that he would be able to prove something. Again, the travel was dangerous, but he had to know what had actually happened. He could not get into the car because he was already there. So they decided to put him at the River Creek. Now, they knew that he had left at exactly 4:43, and so they made it so he would arrive at the creek at 4:44. As soon as he arrived, he saw that this man was dragging this woman's lifeless body and making an attempt to bury her. But after discovering that he just couldn't get her deep enough or into the water deep enough, he had left her. But there at the creek, he had dropped something. There at the creek was the man's wedding ring. Now, this was the greatest find. Jonesy picked up the wedding ring and hoped that the transport back to his time would bring it along with him. As he got out of the chamber, they looked down, and the wedding ring was in his hand. That afternoon, Jonesy and Adam made the trip back to Indiana, and arriving early the next morning, they went to see the captain who ran the police department and told them that they had been out by the creek and had found a wedding ring which was very close to the cross where the lady had been murdered so many years ago. It was then that the captain knew that even though he had always been highly suspicious of his honorable detective, that he was the one who had committed the murder. After a thorough investigation by the police department, the state crime lab, and many other witnesses, that detective was finally brought to justice.